I learned about her from the messages my husband wrote to her at night when he thought I was asleep. He never mentioned me because, as it turned out, in her eyes, he was a free man. Ethan and I have been together for 8 years and married for a little over a year. We met at a friend's party. He accidentally spilled a drink on my shoes, and I remember exactly how he froze for a second, wide-eyed, then laughed this nervous little laugh that somehow made me laugh too. He apologized so many times it got ridiculous, and to make up for it he offered to get me another drink, which somehow turned into us standing by the patio door for hours just talking. It was one of those strange nights where time folds in on itself, and you don't even realize the sun is coming up until someone mentions breakfast. We had nothing and everything in common. His job in software design sounded like an alien language to me, and my work in early childhood education made him blink like I'd said something mythical. But we kept talking, and somewhere between joking about the worst party music and him confessing he hated olives, we just clicked. I gave him my number on the back of a napkin I had stuffed in my clutch, and the next morning, there was already a good morning text waiting for me when I woke up. Looking back now, I think I knew even then, somewhere deep in my gut, that I'd just met someone who was going to matter. Our relationship always seemed strong in that quiet, steady way that doesn't draw attention but makes you feel safe. We had our own little rituals that grounded us. Long weekend breakfasts where we'd take our time with coffee and waffles, sitting at the kitchen table in our pajamas, talking about everything and nothing. Sunday afternoons were usually reserved for movies, the kind we'd rewatch just to quote our favorite lines or fall asleep halfway through together on the couch. We tackled home repairs like a team, with him handling the actual fixing and me reading out instructions or holding tools, laughing at how easily we'd both get distracted mid-project. Ethan has never been the type to make friends at work. He's always been reserved, more of an observer than a participant, the kind of person who lives deeply in his own head. There's a calm about him that drew me in from the beginning, like he moved through the world at his own pace, untouched by the constant noise most people get swept up in. It wasn't flashy or passionate in the way some couples describe, but it was real, solid, and I never questioned it, at least not back then. But about 6 months after the wedding, I started to notice these small, quiet shifts that didn't scream trouble at first, but built up like whispers behind walls. Ethan, who used to come straight home and drop his bag by the door with a tired smile, began coming home later and later, always with vague explanations about meetings running long or traffic being worse than usual, even though his commute hadn't changed. What unsettled me more was how he suddenly couldn't seem to part with his phone. He used to hate texting, used to leave his phone face down and forget where he'd put it half the time, but now it was always in his hand or in his pocket, never out of reach. He'd angle the screen away from me when I walked into the room, sometimes pulling the phone slightly under the table like it was an instinct. I tried to brush it off at first, telling myself he was probably just more involved in some project or maybe finally warming up to the idea of being more connected digitally, but the unease started to root itself deeper every time I saw that little, habitual flinch whenever I got too close to the screen. Then she appeared, Alyssa. At first, it was nothing more than a passing mention, something casual and almost forgettable, like when he said, "The new girl from work, she's having a tough year." I remember the way he said it, though, how his voice softened in a way that felt unfamiliar, not unkind but different. There was a tenderness in his tone, a kind of quiet concern that I had never heard him use when talking about anyone from the office before. Ethan never spoke about his coworkers beyond the occasional complaint about meetings or how someone microwaved fish again in the break room, but with Alyssa, there was this subtle emotional weight behind her name, like she mattered. I told myself not to read too much into it. It's not a crime to care about someone's struggles after all, but something in me, something instinctive, began to take notice of the way she kept coming up in conversation, never too often, never obvious, but always just enough to keep her presence lingering. One night, almost too casually, Ethan asked if it would be okay if he took Alyssa out to a bar, saying she had gone through a difficult breakup and just needed someone to talk to outside of work. He said it like it was no big deal, like he was just being a good person, a kind colleague doing the decent thing for someone who was struggling. I remember staring at him, trying to piece together how I was supposed to feel, because on the surface it sounded harmless, but something about the way he looked at me while waiting for my answer felt loaded, like he already knew I'd hesitate. I asked if I could come with them, thinking maybe it could be a low-pressure thing, maybe she'd feel better meeting someone new in a safe way, but his response was immediate, almost rehearsed. He said it wouldn't help, that it was hard for her to meet new people right now, and that she'd probably feel overwhelmed. I nodded, pretending I understood, but inside I felt something crack, something subtle but unmistakable, like the sound of fabric tearing slowly. He had never gone out of his way like this for any friend of mine, never made excuses or asked for solo time with anyone before. I told myself again not to overthink it, but the unease had already settled in my chest, coiling tighter with every passing hour he was gone. I agreed, even though every instinct in me was screaming that something wasn't right, and the feeling in my stomach was this dull, twisting ache I couldn't shake no matter how much I tried to rationalize it. After that night, it didn't just end with one outing. He started seeing her every Saturday like it was the most natural thing in the world. At first, he told me it was just drinks, a casual check-in to make sure she was okay, but soon it turned into dinners, longer and more elaborate ones that he'd vaguely describe without much detail, always ending with some version of "she just needed company." Then, without even asking, he mentioned one evening that they had gone hiking together because she wanted to unwind, like that explained everything. It was delivered so matter-of-factly, like it was completely normal for a married man to spend his weekends trekking through the woods with a woman he only met a few months ago. I kept telling myself to be understanding, to trust him, because he had never given me a concrete reason not to before, but every new excuse chipped away at that trust in a way that felt almost invisible to him but impossible for me to ignore. Ethan, who once refused to go camping with me because he couldn't stand the thought of insects crawling into his shoes or sleeping without cell service, was suddenly a fan of hiking? It didn't make sense, not even a little, and the more I tried to ignore that contradiction, the louder it echoed in my head. So I started asking questions, not accusingly at first, just trying to understand, trying to hear something in his voice that would make it all make sense again. But the answers I got were slippery, vague things that never actually answered anything. He kept saying it was just friendship, that I was overthinking everything, and at one point he even said, "She's like a sister," as if that was supposed to shut down every fear running through my mind. But the moment I offered to go with them, to join them for one of these hikes or dinners or even just grab coffee together, he brushed me off. He avoided the question, changed the subject, acted like I was being unreasonable, and the space between us, once filled with laughter and quiet comfort, started to stretch wider and colder with every dodged invitation and every half-hearted explanation. I found the receipt by accident, tucked inside the pocket of his jacket while I was doing laundry, a small slip of paper from an expensive restaurant we had talked about for years but never quite had the budget to visit. It was the kind of place we used to pass by on walks, pressing our faces to the glass like kids at a candy store, promising each other that one day when we had a little more money or something special to celebrate we'd go. But we never did. And yet there it was. His name on the bill, the date stamped clear as day, and the total enough to make my heart stop for a second. When I asked him about it, trying to keep my voice steady, he didn't even blink before saying it was just a work lunch, something spontaneous and covered partially by a client. He smiled like it was nothing, like I was being silly for even asking, but I didn't believe him. I couldn't. There was no work event on that day, no meeting circled on the calendar, and Ethan doesn't just happen upon fancy restaurants without mentioning it, especially not ones we used to daydream about together. Something in his eyes didn't match the words coming out of his mouth, and I felt that quiet, sinking certainty begin to take root, that I was being lied to, and he didn't even feel the need to lie well. I checked his phone while he was in the shower, hands shaking the entire time, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, half hoping I'd find nothing and hate myself for doubting him, but knowing deep down I wouldn't. The messages were there, so many of them it felt like I was scrolling through someone else's relationship, not my husband's. He had been writing to her constantly, and not in the neutral, surface-level tone he always used with coworkers. These were personal, intimate, the kind of messages you send when someone is living inside your thoughts. He told her things like, "Hope you slept well," and "Today was great. I want more." There was even one that just read, "I miss you," simple but heavy, like it belonged to someone who had given more than just casual attention. And what cut the deepest wasn't just what he said to her, it was what he didn't say about me. Not once did he mention me, not in passing, not in explanation, not even as an afterthought. It was like I didn't exist in the world he had created with her, and for the first time, I felt like a ghost in my own marriage. When I asked him point blank if Alyssa even knew he was married, he hesitated for just a fraction too long before mumbling something about how it's complicated, and how she knows I'm in a relationship, but he never said the word wife, never looked me in the eye, and the silence between us grew thick with everything he didn't admit. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in anger, not in hysteria, but in this cold, sharp clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. So I picked up my phone, opened Instagram, found her profile with almost no effort and sent her a message. It wasn't long or dramatic, just a simple sentence that carried the weight of everything I was holding in. "Hi. I'm Ethan's wife. We need to talk." And then I sat there staring at the screen, my hands ice cold, waiting for a response that could either shatter the last pieces of denial or confirm the worst thing I already knew. Alyssa answered almost instantly, as if she had been waiting for something to finally make sense, and what she said knocked the breath out of me. She didn't know he was married. She said he had told her that he was free, absolutely free, those were her exact words, and that he had never once mentioned a wife, a home, a life already built with someone else. She didn't sound angry at me. If anything, she sounded stunned, betrayed in a different but equally raw way. Then she sent screenshots as if to prove she wasn't the one lying, as if she needed me to see it for myself, and I did. Message after message of him telling her he dreamed of living with her, of how he couldn't wait for them to share an apartment, for quiet mornings together and weekend trips. There were no signs of hesitation in his words, nothing that suggested he was hesitating or struggling. It wasn't just some fleeting mistake or emotional confusion, it was a parallel life, carefully constructed and hidden, and I realized I wasn't just losing trust in him. I was losing the entire foundation of who I thought he was. I ran into him again, and what crushed me more than anything was that he didn't even seem shaken or ashamed. He didn't mind. He stood there with this strange calmness, like we were just discussing logistics or the weather, and when I asked him how he could do this to me, to us, he said it so plainly, so carelessly, that it almost didn't register at first. He said he felt alive with her, that being with Alyssa made him remember what it was like to feel something real, and that he hadn't felt love since the wedding. Not since the wedding. He looked at me and said I had become a routine, like I was some set of predictable steps he could sleepwalk through without thinking. A routine. After 8 years of loving him, of building a home together, of standing by him through things that would have broken weaker couples, that's what I had become to him. And I just stood there, trying to hold myself together while something inside me quietly shattered beyond repair. He didn't want to try, not even a little. I suggested therapy, holding on to some last fragile hope that maybe we could repair what was left, that maybe beneath all the damage there was still something worth saving. I told him we could talk to someone, take the time to work through it, remind ourselves why we had chosen each other in the first place. But he didn't even hesitate. He looked at me with this empty calm and said, "I don't want to be trapped. I can't pretend anymore." And that was it. He asked for a divorce with the same tone someone might use to cancel a dinner reservation. No tears, no hesitation, no regret. Just a cold, clean break, like all those years we had spent building a life together had already faded for him, like he had been gone long before he ever admitted it out loud. I stood there still aching for the man I used to know, and he was already walking away. I felt like I had been thrown out of an airplane without a parachute, plummeting through a sky I no longer recognized, completely unmoored from the life I thought I was living. This was the same man who used to hide little notes in my lunchbox, scribbled on napkins or posts, sometimes silly, sometimes sweet, always with a kind of tenderness that made ordinary days feel like love letters. He was the man who once waited outside my office in the rain with coffee and an umbrella just because I had a rough morning. And now, standing in the same kitchen where we used to dance barefoot while cooking dinner, he said he doesn't see me in his future. Not as a partner, not as a friend, not even as a memory worth holding on to. It didn't feel real hearing that from someone whose voice used to feel like home. It felt like the floor had opened beneath me and all I could do was fall. Now I am looking for a lawyer, scrolling through names and numbers with hands that won't stop shaking, because this is what my life has come to, not fixing, not fighting, just ending. I live in a house that still has my furniture, my pictures on the walls, my shoes by the door, but none of it feels like mine anymore. I feel like a guest in my own home, moving quietly from room to room, trying not to cross paths with the man who once shared everything with me. We don't talk anymore, not even out of anger, just out of absence. We cook separately now, two strangers navigating the same space like reluctant roommates. The only time I hear his voice is late at night, muffled behind the bedroom door, when he whispers to her, soft and secretive, as if I'm already gone and he's just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how to live until tomorrow, how to breathe through this hollow quiet where love used to be. But even through all the silence, I know one thing with absolute certainty. He has already left. He just hasn't taken his things yet.